the final installment of um, our Fallen Mediocre Club. So I think you can probably guess who we've got this week. We have the Northern Eagles.
And Northern Eagles.
So that was, yeah, sorry.
Brett Kamali, the Immortal.
Yeah. So we'll talk a bit about Brett Kamali, and that's their logo. There's another sort of version of their logo where they had Central Coast, North Sydney, Manly, Warringah.
It's not a bad logo, in fairness.
It's kind of like the American, the US bull-headed eagle a bit, isn't it?
It does look a bit like a bald eagle, which is weird because admittedly, I don't live on the Central Coast, but I don't think of North Sydney or the Central Coast as being like the home of eagles. But
no. Well, obviously it comes from the Manly, but
it comes from the Manly Sea Eagles. I get that, but this is just the Northern Eagles anyway.
Yeah. All right. So, the story of the Northern Eagles is really the story of two rivals coming together to form one of the worst mergers in sporting history. I think this merger was destined to fail right from the word go.
Yep.
And everyone's favourite club, Manly, were really the main antagonists in this story. Now, I was watching it's on YouTube, this documentary, A Century of Rugby League, so it's from 2008, about the history of all the clubs, and they get to the part about the Northern Eagles. This merger was described as a loveless marriage, the merger from hell, and it was also described as trying to make two rival bikie gangs come together and work together. So that pretty much sets the picture up for the story of the Northern Eagles. So at the end of the 99 season, despite meeting the criteria for the inclusion of to be included in the 2014 team comp, Manly agreed to merge with the insolvent North Sydney Bears. Now, if you actually take it a step further, I believe North Sydney were ready to move to the Central Coast. Again, in that documentary, Roy Masters says that the reason why North Sydney isn't a standalone club right now is because, or the Bears, I should say, is because of rain at Gosford. So it rained a lot at Gosford in 1999 or earlier, delayed the building of that stadium because the Bears were going to move to Gosford. Like they were going to be the Central Coast Bears. It's not that far, North Sydney and Central Coast. Some people say Central Coast is an outer suburb of Sydney anyway. So have that supporter base in Sydney, kind of like your St. George Illawarra we talked about last week. You've got a Sydney base, you're just outside of Sydney. Alas, that didn't happen. So North Sydney were basically not going to be part of 2000. So Manly came to their rescue. Together they formed the Northern Eagles, as we know, and they would play out of the newly built Central Coast Stadium and also Manly's Brookvale Oval. So that was going to be their two home grounds. Again, kind of like your St. George Illawarra, not executed as well. That's the thing too. North Sydney had nurtured the move to the Central Coast and the rebuilding of Graham Park into the Central Coast Stadium. But financial difficulties during the 99 season saw them on the outer. So then in the hands of a receiver, the lifeline offered by the joint venture was their only hope. So North Sydney really had no option. It's either go with Manly or you're done. Though many within the Bears club would disagree. So there's obviously a bit of conjecture there. So from the get-go, you can see Manly's in the position of power. North is in a very weak position. They only had 3 seasons, 2000, 2001, 2002. They were pretty mediocre. They finished 12th, 10th, and 9th, respectively, each year. And the club there was just a lot of infighting on the board. They never got along, the Manly and the North's crew. Things like, for example, in 2000, Manly had a secretly approved predominantly maroon away jersey that they used against St. George that really annoyed the North's group. Like that was just one of the things that an example of things that were going on. Another thing that really hurt them is they had to shed a lot of players. Like both Manly and Norths were quite strong in the 90s, but come together, there's a salary cap that has to be met. So they had to say goodbye to a lot of their good players. Anyway, season 2000, Gosford really took them in as their own team. Their first 3 crowds were like 20,000, which is capacity, 19,000 and 19,000. And at Gosford, they ended up averaging about 15,000, 16,000 that season. So they were getting 75, 80% capacity crowds at Gosford, which was fantastic. However, the crowds at Brookvale Oval weren't great. They were really lagging behind. So there was a push to actually, look, if they're showing up in Gosford, let's just play our home games there. But, surprise, surprise, Manly side of the merger didn't want that. They wanted to keep playing at Brookvale Oval. Anyway, so to try to come over these off-field dramas and try to make peace, they basically threw all their eggs in the Brett Camorley basket. So they poached him from us. We obviously got Matthew Orford, and we got a pretty good 5 seasons out of Matt Orford. But they basically threw all their resources and faith in the signing of Brett Camorley. They hoped his on-field talents would bring much-needed on-field success, and therefore that would bring harmony at board level. But as we know, it didn't really go that way. So they were still mediocre. They didn't make the finals, and the infighting at the club continued. So anyway, come 2002, the NRL license actually reverted back to Manly, although they continued under the Northern Eagles name. So 2002 was really the end before the end officially. So halfway through the season, they stopped playing at Gosford because the crowds had really fallen away to 8,000. And it was basically, I get all of my information from the RL 1908 former website. I use one of those way back time machines to get all this information. So this is a quote: "In comparison to the crowds, the Central Coast were embarrassed." So this is talking about 2002. The crowds on the Central Coast were embarrassingly low and were abandoned halfway through the season. The fans of the Central Coast made it clear they wanted their own team and one that wanted them. So I think the fans realised that, hang on, this is just Manly. They clearly don't want to be playing here in Gosford. So they turned away in droves, which is fair enough. Like, I think, you know, if I was there in season 2000, oh, yep, they're Gosford. Yeah, they're going to represent us. And then halfway through, it's just Manly in disguise. I'd be turned away too. So I can't really blame him for that. And then in 2003, the merger officially ended. Manly Warringah Sea Eagles name and colours were restored. And the North Sydney club went on to play in the comp immediately below the NRL. Now they're currently, and they still play there, which is now the Canterbury Cup, I believe. They're a feeder club to the Sydney Roosters. However, Dubs, I want to talk a bit about North Sydney and what's happened to them since, or what they're trying to achieve, I guess, since the end of the merger, because it was really sad to see North Sydney basically get bullied and kicked around like that by Manly. If you didn't hate Manly enough, is another real great reason to hate them even more, the way their treatment of North Sydney. So basically, as early as 2004, the Bears have been pushing for re-inclusion as the Central Coast Bears. They realise there's too many clubs in Sydney, but they're really trying to get back in the league any way they can. So they're obviously prepared to relocate, as they were before this whole club rationalisation business. 2004, their bid was rejected. However, the NRL was offering incentives for clubs, Sydney-based clubs, to move to the Central Coast, but they were looking for a current club, not a club that's not in the current NRL. They bidded in 2006, but lost to the Gold Coast Titans. Then in 2009, the Central Coast Bears started a membership structure. They set themselves a target of 5,000 members by March 2011. And as of November 2011, they had 7,600 financial members, which is not a bad effort for a club that doesn't exist. So to get 7,500 people signed up, I thought was, that's pretty good. They targeted 2015, but were again overlooked. And then in 2017, the NRL was selling off the Gold Coast Titans. And so guess who was popping up? It was the North Sydney club. They wanted to buy that license. They wanted to call themselves the Gold Coast Bears, playing their traditional red, white and black, play all their games on the Gold Coast, but play one game against Manly at North Sydney Oval. And that's their whole angle. We play all their games at Gosford, Gold Coast. Just let us play Manly in Sydney. That's all we want. That's all they wanted to play in North Sydney Oval. But yeah, on NRL, they sold the license to their current owners, the current Gold Coast Titans owners, Daryl Kelly and Rebecca Frizzell. And then even in early 2018, there was a few whispers saying the Bears were in consortium with the from Western Australia. So it shows you how much the Bears want to be part of the NRL. And then on the 11th of November 2018, the North Sydney CEO David Perry said he was aiming at the North Sydney / Central Coast bid to come to fruition when the current TV deal ended in 2020. Perry suggested the NRL should look at creating a promotion relegation system similar to other sports around the world. Interesting concept. I mean, I think if they were going to do it, probably that late 2000s is when it should have been done, when clubs were rationalising and whatnot. Dubs, I'm sure you agree with me. I'm really for promotion relegation. It's not really in the Australian sporting culture, or at least at a professional level. Like, it happens in the lower leagues. Your local footy or rugby league teams can go up and down.
Happens everywhere outside the professional national comps.
Yeah, I would love to see like a professional league, and you have and have-nots. You might get imagine if a struggling Western suburbs got promoted back to the NRL one year. They might only last a couple of seasons before getting relegated, but for their diehard 5,000-6,000 fans, they'd be treating that like a premiership. But anyway, so yeah, that's basically the Northern Eagles, and it's kind of been this talk's been derailed into the Bears and their continual fight back to the top flight. And I'd love to see the Bears back there. They're willing. If you're going to expand, give it to a club with a bit of history and tradition that's going to give you a membership base. I think the AFL's did a great job with the Brisbane Lions merger. And obviously the relocation of the Sydney Swans. I think the AFL done their whole club rationalisation a lot better than what the rugby league did. But anyway, so yeah, would you want to see the Bears back, Dub? Central Coast Bears, would you love to see them?
Well, certainly I'd love to see them in preference to another expansion side, or I'd love to see, if we're going to see new teams coming in New South Wales, I think the teams like the Bears need to be front of the line. They were a 1908 foundation club. I know they didn't have enormous amount of success. They won a couple of premierships and hadn't for some
in the 20s.
The 20s, yeah. But they were a 1908 side. They did exist nearly 100 years in rugby league, and they still exist in the top flight of rugby league, and they still exist in the New South Wales competition. I agree that, and it's easy to say in hindsight, and they were probably just desperate to try and find a way to establish themselves somewhere. But the merger with Manly was just an absolute clusterfudge, and the Northern Eagles is sort of a blot on the history of both their clubs that they probably just want to forget, particularly the Northern Bears, and especially since the Northern Bears,
North Sydney Bears,
the North Sydney Bears just played in a part of Sydney that doesn't seem to have a strong representation anymore. Good old North Sydney Oval, which is a beautiful venue where they, I think, 80 odd years of their existence, possibly more. Fantastic, lovely old oval. We played cricket there. There was the old Northern Spirit soccer team there for a while. It's a shame that that's not represented. And I don't like rationalisation overall, but I understand it's happened in Australia, particularly because of the way we are. But it seems like we go to great lengths to include certain teams that perhaps haven't earned their place, whereas a club that has earned their place historically.
Yeah.
So if we are extending, expanding, relocating, rationalising teams, if a team like the North Sydney Bears isn't on the top of that list, I feel that we're approaching it the wrong way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, one of those, I can't remember which one of their attempts, like they had a lot of corporate support too. Like there was some, I can't remember who it was, I should have included it. There was some business that was going to put in serious money for them to be part of the league. So anyway, let's have a quick look at some of the gallery as we do.
Meme away.
There's not many pictures here. I don't know. The Northern Eagles, they're real, yeah. Anyway, here's the Central Coast Bears logo from 2009. Here's one of the infamous maroon jerseys. Their colours were shocking too. I don't know. It just looked, yeah. Anyway,
you're merging the two clubs that could not possibly merge their colours.
Exactly. Yeah, it
shows.
There's another one of their
slightly better, but let's face it, that's an inverted Manly jumper.
Yeah. This is a bit of a mock-up, Central Coast Stadium with the Central Coast Bears logo and in the in goal. So I thought,
right.
I'm all for the Central Coast Bears. Bring them in.
Better than the old. Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, the old.
What he left the Storm for.
Yep. Yeah, he left to one of the most mediocre teams ever. And then he went to Cronulla afterwards. Jeff Tuvey, he played his last 2 seasons of professional, league in Northern Eagles colours. I think that's obviously his farewell game. There's their team photo from 2001. I think Morley's somewhere in the front row, maybe. Anyway, there's a bunch of their players: Adam Muir, Steve Menzies, Andrew Frood. Yeah, Jason Taylor. He was a good player.
Jason Taylor, of course, fantastic player for North Sydney Bears prior to that.
Yeah, he was a good player. There's Tuvey. I think that was obviously his last game.
Had a few decent players. They had a pretty good squad, really. Should have performed better than they did. Clearly, they didn't have a winning culture there.
Yeah, exactly. There's another maroon jersey. That was their white jersey,
That's a bit more North Sydney-esque.
and that's about it
That's all she wrote.
for the Northern Eagles / Central Coast Bears, hopefully potential future team. So that's the end, Dubs. That's all our former mediocre clubs. Unless you want me to go back into the history a bit more, maybe talk about Sydney Uni or Annandale or one of those clubs that popped up in the 20s or the 30s that didn't last very long.
Perhaps we should, we'll give you a holiday task over the summer after this season's over to research some incredibly obscure old New South Wales Rugby League clubs. Find out.
Well, I was thinking, Dubs, why don't we do a series? We profile a Victorian club, like, you know, the Altona Roosters, the Northern Thunder, we give a bit of the VRL teams a bit of a plug. I think that might be maybe for next season.